Welcome, students. We're going to take some notes on Alexander's empire and also Hellenism, the impact of Alexander's empire. This is chapter 5, sections 4 and 5. So title this Alexander's empire. Let's begin. To set the context, you don't need to write this down, but Macedonia is the kingdom of mountain villages in the north of Greece. So Sparta is in the very southern of Greece. Athens is in the middle. Macedonia is more towards the north. King Philip II was a ruler, brilliant general, dreams of controlling Greece. Macedonians call themselves Greek, but the rest of Greece does not consider them such. Philip's army. Philip creates a well-trained professional army and invades Greece. Conquest of Greece. It was easy because more than one Greek city felt ambivalent about fighting back. Some Greek cities invited Philip to invade. Athens asked Sparta for help against invasion, but Sparta declined. At the Battle of Chaeronea, 1,000 Athenians were killed. 338 BC, Macedonians control Greece. After the Battle of Chaeronea, Philip changes his strategy and treats Athens with great respect, releasing Athenian prisoners of war. As a result, the Athenians then choose to pretend that Philip was now a friend of Athens. Philip makes a speech at Corinth suggesting Greek submission to his kinship would be good for Greece. So all of that you did not need to write down, but what I would like for you to write down is that the Corinthian League is formed and led by King Philip with the intent of attacking the Persians. And this is really where Alexander the Great is born. King Philip II is Alexander the Great's father, and so with all of this conquest that Philip II had done of Macedonia, it really prepares his son Alexander the Great to continue this legacy and to actually be the one to attack the Persians. Without Philip II, Alexander the Great would not have been so great. Philip's murder, you don't need to write this down. Married for a fifth time, a Macedonian woman. Alexander was a legitimate son, but half Greek. You don't need to write that down either. This marriage gave Attalus, one of Philip's generals, occasion to call into question the legitimacy of a half-Greek prince inheriting the Macedonian throne. Philip's murder. So Philip would be murdered. Some suspect, however, Alexander was behind the murder. This occurs in 336 BC. His son is named King of Macedonia and becomes Alexander the Great. So due to Philip's murder, you should write that down, Alexander will become king of the Macedonians and all of Greece and become Alexander the Great. So really, Alexander the Great is set up by his father to command an army to invade Persia and all of the known world at the time. Alexander's conquests, Alexander's early life. He was tutored by Aristotle. Write that down. He was inspired by the Iliad. Now, if you remember, the Iliad was the story by Homer, written about the Trojan horse. The story went that the Mycenaeans had a queen named Helen, and she was kidnapped by Paris of Troy, brought back to Troy, and then the Mycenaean king launched 1,000 ships to regain his wife, and he would bring with him Achilles, the demigod, who would then kill in a single hand-to-hand combat Paris's brother Hector of Troy, and then the Mycenaeans would pretend to leave Troy, but actually they would build a horse and hide inside the horse, several of them, including Homer's hero of the story, the Odyssey. And they would invade Troy through the horse and take on the Trojans, or the of Troy. So Alexander the Great, he would really be inspired by that conquest and the story there. military training he would receive at an early age. He becomes king when 20 years old, and so he would actually only live to about 33 years of age. So for 13 years, he will have most of his victories, but it's that 20 years that really he is trained and tutored and inspired, Aristotle being the philosopher who birthed the scientific method, and so much of that reasoning skill would help Alexander the Great, not just in battles, but also in maintaining his empire through political means. You don't need to write this down, but he destroys Thebes, a Greek city-state, to curb a rebellion, and that would be the start of his conquest. As you see right here, Alexander will defeat the Persians. He will start in Granicus, near Sardis, and then he will make his way all the way to Egypt, and then to Babylon, Persepolis, all the way to India, and back. Invasion of Persia and beyond. Write this down. Alexander invades Persia and defeats them 3 different times. The first time he attacks them, it is a very quick victory, and then the Persians rise up again. I believe it was Darius II. It might have been Darius III, who retaliates against Alexander the Great, and so Alexander the Great will have to beat them a second time, causing this Persian king to run away. But then it will take a third time of defeating the Persians to actually defeat them once and for all. You don't need to write this down, but Alexander captures cities of Babylon, Susa, Persepolis. He would actually burn Persepolis to the ground. And the ashes of Persepolis would signal total destruction of the Persian Empire. And so the Persians would no longer be an empire, but the Greeks would be the ones who, for a few hundred years, would maintain control until the Romans. He will march into Egypt and is crowned pharaoh in 332 BC. The Egyptians, instead of fighting against Alexander the Great and his forces, they basically feel like he is such a great leader and so much better than their own personal pharaoh. So they just simply make their pharaoh abdicate the throne, and they ask Alexander the Great to be their pharaoh without any bloodshed. Alexander the Great will then make his way to Central Asia, all the way to the border of India as he fights across the desert. What is challenging in India is that he comes across war elephants. Now, the phalanx, which is the Greek military formation, is great against arrows and assaults, and even cavalry they can resist. But those war elephants will be a different story. He will reluctantly return to Babylon. His men are homesick and they want to go back to their wives and such, and they're tired of war because this had been a 13-year campaign. So he would actually die in Babylon, sadly enough. You see right here another picture of Alexander's empire and his conquest. Quite a bit of territory he covered there. So what's Alexander's legacy? The important legacy here is the Hellenistic culture. What he does is he brings the West to the East. He blended the Egyptian, Persian, Indian culture, which is the Eastern culture, with the Western culture of Greece. Alexander will take a Persian wife. Also important is Egypt, Alexandria, the city of Egypt. Will be a place that preserves Greek and Egyptian science. And so much of our archaeology that we've acquired in the last 100 years has come from Alexandria, Egypt. If the Hellenists and if the Egyptians had not preserved these Greek texts and these Egyptian sciences, much of our science today would not be the same. Astronomers, Aristarchus proves Sun is larger than Earth, proposes planets revolve around Sun, not accepted for 14 centuries. However, he would be later proven correct. Eratosthenes uses geometry to calculate Earth's circumference. There's some people that believe that during the Dark Ages, about 1,000 years later, that people would believe that the Earth was flat, but that's only the backcountry farmers. Most educated people knew that the world was round. However, the size of the Earth was a different story, and so you have these astronomers and such that are able to prove that the world was round. The empire becomes 3 kingdoms. You don't need to write this down, but Macedonia, Egypt, and Old Persia would be the 3 kingdoms after Alexander dies. And that's oftentimes the case, is that empires are divided up after the main leader dies. Hellenistic philosophy, important to write down both Stoicism and Epicureanism. Make sure to write those down. Stoicism, it promoted the virtues and simple lives. If you say that somebody is stoic, usually they are somebody who is emotionless. A lot of people see it as an insult, though it shouldn't be, because Stoicism, yes, though it is devoid of emotion, it's very much into simple living and virtue. And so it's focusing not so much on the emotions, but more on the simple and virtuous life. Epicureanism believes people should focus on what the senses can perceive. They believe that seeing is believing, whereas the gospel teaches that seeing is not believing. To simply see the facade of somebody is not to get the whole picture. But you need to inquire more, that it's not just simply the senses, but behind the person. Epicureans would disregard that. And it's interesting how in Acts 17:18, both the Epicureans and the Stoic philosophers began to debate with Paul. Some of them are even asking, what does this babbler have to say? They really did not want to listen much to what Paul the Apostle was saying, because they just wanted to argue. And so, but it is interesting and neat to see that the Stoicism and Epicureanism is in the Bible and recorded there. And you can see the preachings of Paul to those 2 groups. Astronomy, you don't need to write this down, as we mentioned. You will also have with math, you'll have Euclid, mathematician. He works on elements and the basis of courses in geometry. So much of geometry that we have today is thanks to Euclid. Archimedes, probably the most famous of the scientists and mathematicians. You don't need to write this down, but he accurately estimated the value of pi. He explained the law of the lever. He invented the Archimedes screw. Also a pump which raised water from one level to another. He invented the compound pulley for lifting objects. So Archimedes, very important philosopher, scientist, mathematician, who is part of the Hellenistic culture. That is the end of the notes. Thank you very much.